At my little brother's wedding, right in the middle of the toast, my wife leaned into my ear and told me the baby she was carrying wasn't mine, it was his, the groom's, and I just smiled and lifted my glass and said, "Congratulations to the happy couple," because 3 weeks before that day, I already knew, and I'd spent every one of those days quietly building the thing that was about to take both of them apart. Hey, before I get 1 inch into this, let me just say thank you for showing up. It honestly means the world that you'd hand a stranger a chunk of your afternoon like this. So do me one small favor while you're here. Type the city you're listening from down in the comments, because I read every single one of them, and I'll call you out by name in the next video, that's a promise. And if this story gets its hooks in you the way the whole thing got its hooks in me, go on and tap that hit subscribe, because that little button is pretty much the only thing keeping a small channel like mine alive. Okay. So, let me take you back 3 weeks before that wedding to a regular Tuesday in June, because for the wedding to hit you the way it hit me, you have to be standing where I was standing on that Tuesday. I'm Ryan. I run a mechanical contracting shop here in Kansas City, heating and cooling and boiler work mostly, commercial stuff. Out of a building off Front Street in the East Bottoms where the whole place smells like cut copper and river mud. Brooke, my wife, she asked me that morning to run her car up to the shop on Warnell and get the oil changed because she had a nail thing and then lunch with her sister. Normal ask. We'd been married 6 years. I said sure, grabbed her keys off the hook by the door, kissed her cheek, drove her little Lexus up Warnell, and I'm sitting in that waiting room with the burnt coffee and the TV nobody's watching, and I go to flip her visor down to grab the mileage sticker so I could tell the guy. And something slides out and lands face down in my lap. It was an ultrasound picture, one of those grainy black things with the white numbers in the corner. Now, here's the part where my stomach did something I can't really describe to you, because 2 years earlier, I had a vasectomy. We'd talked about it, we'd decided we were done thinking about kids. She was the one who pushed for it, honestly, and I went to a urologist on the plaza and got it done, and I have the little card in my wallet to this day. So I'm looking at this picture, and I'm looking at the date in the corner, and I'm doing the kind of math you never want to do in a Jiffy Lube waiting room, and there is no version of that math where that baby is mine. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I just went very, very quiet inside, the way you do when the floor drops but you're still somehow standing. And then, because I'm apparently a glutton for punishment, I looked at her phone, which she'd left in the cup holder because she took her personal one and left the car one. And I want to be honest with you. I have never gone through her phone in 6 years. I never had a reason to. But that day, my hands were already moving before my brain caught up. It didn't take long. It was all right there, in a thread she had saved under a woman's name, Steph from Pilates. Except Steph from Pilates was writing things no Pilates friend has ever written, and Steph from Pilates signed off one of them with a nickname, and I knew that nickname because I gave it to him when he was 6 years old and couldn't say his own name right. It was Tyler, my little brother. Steph from Pilates was my baby brother. I put the phone back exactly where it was. I paid the man $42 for the oil change. I drove her car home. And that night I sat across the dinner table from her while she talked about her sister's new kitchen. And I ate my chicken, and I smiled, and something in me that had been asleep my whole life sat straight up and opened its eyes. Let me back up and tell you who these people are, because you need it. I grew up in Raytown, East Side, the flat working part of the metro where the strip malls all have a payday loan place and a Chinese buffet. My dad was a pipe fitter, local 533, hands like catcher's mitts, and he dropped dead of a heart attack at 54 in the parking lot of the Price Chopper on 63rd, and I was 19 and I had to identify him. And I don't talk about that much, so I'll just leave it there. After that it was me, my mom Sharon, and Tyler, who's 7 years younger than me. And I want you to understand the shape of our family because it explains everything. I was the one who worked. I got my apprenticeship. I froze on rooftops in January. I saved. I started Kessler Mechanical out of the back of a used van when I was 26. and I built it into 11 trucks and a real shop and a payroll I make every 2 weeks without fail. Tyler was the golden one. Tyler was charming. Tyler was good-looking. Tyler could talk a dog off a meat truck. And Tyler never held a job longer than a year. Medical device sales, he'd say. Consulting, he'd say. Mostly, he'd say he needed to borrow a little something to get through a rough patch, and my mom would look at me across her kitchen table in Raytown with those eyes, and I would write the check. Every single time. And more than once, I'd actually write up a little note, a paper saying he'd pay it back, because my accountant told me to, and Tyler would sign it and laugh like it was a joke between us. Remember those notes. They come back around. My mom loved Tyler like the sun came up because he asked her to. She loved me like you love the guy who fixes your furnace. Useful, reliable, not somebody you kiss on the forehead. I met Brooke at a Royals game in 2018, up in the club level, a client's box. She was beautiful, and she was funny, and she made me feel like the guy from Raytown had finally arrived somewhere. We got married the next fall, moved into a house I'd already bought 2 years before we ever met. A nice old brick 4-square in Brookside, off 63rd and Brookside Boulevard, with a porch and a maple tree that turns the color of a fire truck in October. I bought that house alone. My name, my money, before her. Write that down, too. The vasectomy was 2 years in. She said she didn't want kids, and honestly, I wasn't sure I did either after watching my dad work himself into a grave, so I did it, for us, for the plan she said she wanted. And now I'm sitting in a Jiffy Lube holding a picture of a baby that isn't mine, that can't be mine, and the father is the little brother whose diapers I basically changed. So you understand now why I smiled. I smiled because for the first time in my life I could see the whole board. The morning after the ultrasound I called a lawyer. Her name is Diane Fenwick. She's got an office in a converted house near the plaza. Silver hair, reading glasses on a chain. The calmest human being I've ever met. I sat in her office and I laid it all out, the vasectomy, the picture, the phone, Tyler, all of it. And she didn't gasp, she just wrote on her yellow pad, and then she put her pen down and told me the 2 things that changed my whole strategy. She said, first, the good news, in Missouri your separate property stays yours. The business, I formed that LLC before we married, that's mine. The house, I bought that before we married, that's mine. Whatever we built together during the marriage gets split fair, but the 2 big things, the house and the company, those she cannot touch. I felt my shoulders come down about an inch. Then she told me the bad news, and here's where I want you to feel the trapdoor, because I sure did. She said in Missouri, when a baby is born while you're married, the law presumes the husband is the father. Presumes it. Automatically. She said Brooke's lawyer will absolutely argue that my vasectomy failed. And here's the gut punch. Sometimes they do fail. It's rare, but it happens. And a judge knows it happens. So my little card in my wallet? Not enough. She said if I didn't handle this exactly right, I could end up legally on the hook for 18 years of child support for a kid that is 100% my brother's. And the only thing that shuts that door for good is a DNA test proving it isn't mine, and you can't just walk up to your brother at Sunday dinner and swab his cheek. So there it was. I had the truth, and the truth wasn't enough. I needed proof I couldn't legally force anybody to give me. And I had exactly 1 window coming up where all the players would be in one room with their guard down, Tyler's wedding, which was in 3 weeks. Because, oh, did I forget to mention it? My charming little brother, the father of my wife's baby, was about to marry another woman entirely. Her name was Hannah Doyle, from Mission Hills over on the Kansas side. The kind of family with a name on a hospital wing. Tyler had finally landed the money he'd been chasing his whole life, and he was going to marry into it in a big white tent at a country club while carrying on with my wife, while my wife carried his kid. That was the man. That was the whole man, right there. So I did the hardest thing I've ever done. I did nothing. I went to work. I came home. I smiled at Brooke. I let Tyler clap me on the back at the rehearsal and call me his best man, which I was. God help me. I was the best man, and I let him hand me the rings, and I stood up there in a rented suit in the July heat with the cicadas screaming in the trees, and I waited. The wedding was at a country club out in Mission Hills, all limestone and hydrangeas, the kind of place where the valet judges your shoes. Brooke wore this green dress, and she was maybe 2 glasses of Chardonnay in before the ceremony even started. She'd been jumpy all week, and I knew why. She was so close to something she wanted. She just didn't know which thing she was going to get. We got through the vows, we got through the dinner, and then came the toasts, and I gave mine, the best man's toast, and I want you to know I gave a good one. I talked about Tyler as a kid. I got the room laughing. I raised my glass to Hannah and told her, "Welcome to the family," and everyone went, "Aw," and I sat back down next to my wife. And that's when Brooke leaned into me. I could smell the wine. And she put her hand on my leg under the table, real sweet, and she whispered right into my ear, and I will never forget the words as long as I live. She said, "You know it's Tyler's, right? The baby. It's his. I just wanted you to know before it starts to show so you don't embarrass yourself." And she pulled back and gave me this look, this smug, warm, poisonous little look, like checkmate, like she'd been dying to say it. She thought she had me. In her head, see, I was the presumed father, so I was stuck. In her head, she was going to take a nice chunk of Ryan the furnace guy on her way to Tyler, and I'd never say a word, because who would want the whole city knowing his wife was pregnant by his brother? She thought my shame was her leverage. So I smiled at her. I picked up my glass, and I said, "To the happy couple." And I clinked her glass, and I drank. The look on her face, she didn't know what to do with that. She'd loaded the gun and pulled the trigger, and I just stood there and said thanks. It rattled her. I could see it rattle her. And honestly, that little moment, watching the smug drain right out of her face, that was the first good breath I'd taken in 3 weeks. But I still needed the DNA, and Tyler was 10 feet away in a tuxedo. Now here's where the whole thing almost fell apart, so pay attention. My plan for that night was simple and stupid. Tyler chews gum constantly, spearmint, always has since he was a kid, and I figured I'd wait for him to spit a piece out and grab it. That's a real way to collect DNA, Diane had told me. A discreet lab could work with it. So I'm following my brother around his own wedding like a weirdo, watching his mouth. And finally I see him wad up his gum in a cocktail napkin and set it on a high-top table by the bar. And I move in, and I've got my hand almost on it. And a server swoops in out of nowhere and clears the whole table, napkin and all, gone, into a bus tub, wheeled off into the kitchen. Just like that. And I'm standing there empty-handed, and I feel the whole thing slipping, because who knows when I get all of them in a room again and I'm about to do something desperate, when a voice next to me says, "You're following him too." It was Hannah, the bride, standing there in her wedding dress with a glass of champagne and an expression I recognized, because it was the same one I'd been wearing for 3 weeks. The expression of somebody who knows. She said she'd found things on Tyler's phone a month ago. Not enough to prove anything, not enough to call off a wedding her father had put $100,000 into, but enough to make her sick. A woman's name, Steph from Pilates. She'd been telling herself she was crazy. And then she'd watched me give that toast, and she'd watched my wife whisper in my ear and watch my face not move, and she said, "I don't think either of us is crazy." I'll tell you, I almost didn't trust it. It could have been a test. But something in her eyes was just tired and honest and done. So I told her. Standing at the edge of her own wedding reception, I told this poor woman that Steph from Pilates was my wife, that my wife was carrying Tyler's baby, that the guy she'd married 4 hours ago already had a whole second life. And she didn't cry. She just nodded slowly, like the last piece of a puzzle clicking. And she said, "What do you need?" 2 weeks later, a padded envelope showed up at my shop. Inside was Tyler's electric razor, the one from the guest bathroom still full of stubble, and a note in Hannah's handwriting that said, "I hope this is enough. It's the only thing of value he's ever given me. It was enough. While the lab was running it, everything blew wide open because Brooke didn't wait. 10 days after the wedding, I got served. She'd filed first in Jackson County, and her lawyer came out swinging. They asked the court for temporary maintenance. That's what Missouri calls spousal support. They asked to freeze the business accounts, and this is the part that made me sick. They filed acknowledging the pregnancy and naming me, her husband, as the father of the expected child, and requesting temporary child support be set up in advance. She was doing exactly what Diane warned me she'd do. She was writing the presumption. On paper to that court, that was my baby. We had a temporary hearing about 3 weeks in, and it was ugly. Their lawyer stood up and painted me as a controlling husband who'd emptied the marriage of joy, who worked 80 hours a week and left this poor woman alone. And now, pregnant and abandoned, she needed the court's protection. He mentioned my company's revenue like it was a crime. He asked the judge to have me start paying her $1,500 a month right then, that day, before anything was proven. And I sat there, and I watched the judge actually consider it. That's the part nobody tells you. It doesn't matter that you know the truth. In that room, for a good 10 minutes, I watched a judge lean toward making me pay support to the woman carrying my brother's child, because on paper I was the husband, and the husband is presumed the father, and the law is the law. Diane fought it. She told the court there was a pending question of paternity and requested no support be ordered until genetic testing was complete, and the judge, thank God, held off. But he gave us 60 days, and he made clear that if that testing didn't happen, the presumption stands. 60 days. That was the window. That was the whole ballgame. I walked out of that courthouse downtown into a wall of August heat, and I sat in my truck in the parking garage, and I put my head on the steering wheel, because for the first time I really understood I could lose this. The truth was on my side, and I could still lose. Then my phone buzzed. It was the lab. 99.99%. Tyler was the father. It was as close to certainty as the world lets you have. I called Diane, and I could hear her actually smile through the phone, which she never does, and she said, "Okay, Ryan, now we stop playing defense." But before the legal part landed, I had to deal with my mother, because my mother had picked a side. See, once the divorce got filed, the story spread through the family the way these things do, and the version that spread was Brooke's version, fed by Tyler. Poor pregnant Brooke, cold, heartless Ryan going scorched earth over a marriage that just didn't work out. And my mother, my own mother, called me up and lit into me, told me I was being bitter, told me I'd always been jealous of Tyler, told me a real man would let his wife go with some dignity and not drag the family through court. She actually said, and I'm quoting her, "You have everything, Ryan. Would it kill you to let her have something?" And I almost told her right then. It was right there on my tongue. The whole thing, the baby, the brother, all of it. But I didn't, because Diane had told me to hold the DNA result close until the exact right moment, and I trusted Diane more than I trusted my own broken heart. So I just said, "Mom, one day soon you're going to wish you'd asked me what actually happened before you called me bitter." And I hung up. And she didn't call back, and that silence sat on my chest for 2 weeks. The right moment came at Sunday dinner at her house in Raytown. My mom does a big family dinner the second Sunday of every month, has forever, pot roast and the good rolls. And everybody comes, and I made sure everybody came to this one. Tyler and Brooke were both there sitting next to each other like they were just grieving in-laws, playing the cold Ryan story to a room that already believed it. Hannah wasn't there. Hannah was already 3 states away by then, staying at her sister's, an annulment in motion, but she'd texted me that morning one line, "Do it, and tell your mom I'm sorry she raised 1 good son and 1 snake." I waited until dessert. My mom was passing out the cobbler, and I set a manila folder on the table, right on the good tablecloth, and I opened it, and I slid 1 page toward the center where everyone could see it. I said, "Before anybody says another word about how bitter I am, I want the whole family to know what I've been bitter about." Tyler went white. Brooke reached for the folder, and I put my hand flat on it and looked at her, and she stopped. I said, calm as I could, "That's a paternity test. That's Brooke's baby. And the father isn't me because I had a vasectomy 2 years ago, which most of you knew. The father is Tyler." You could hear the refrigerator running. That's how quiet it got. My mom, she picked up that page with shaking hands, and she read it, and she read it again. And she looked at Tyler, and she looked at Brooke sitting there in her maternity top at her table, eating her cobbler, and I watched something break in my mother's face that I don't think ever fully healed, because she'd called me bitter. She'd asked me if it would kill me to let Brooke have something. And now she was holding the reason why in her own 2 hands. Tyler tried. Oh, he tried. He stood up and started in with the charm. The okay, everybody just calm down. This is complicated. There's a lot of context here. The same voice he'd used to borrow money for 15 years. And I let him talk for about 10 seconds, and then I laid down the second thing from the folder. A stack of paper. Every promissory note he'd ever signed for money I'd lent him. $31,000 over 8 years, all documented, all with his signature, notes he'd laughed while signing. I said, "And Tyler, since we're doing honesty, those are due, all of them. My lawyer's already filed to collect. You've got a lot of context to work out, so you'd better get started." He didn't have a voice for that. The charm just stopped working. He looked around the table for somebody to save him, and there was nobody. Because Brooke wasn't going to save him. Brooke had her own fire to deal with, and my mother? My mother wouldn't even look at him. She was looking at me, and she opened her mouth to say something, maybe sorry, I don't know, and I just held up my hand, gentle, and I said, "Not tonight, Mom. Tonight you eat your dinner and you think about who actually shows up for you." And I stood up and I got my keys and I drove home to Brookside with the windows down. The legal part, after that, it was almost boring. Once the DNA hit the file, the whole thing collapsed for them like a wet cardboard box. The child support they'd tried to pin on me, gone, wiped. The presumption rebutted the second the test hit the record, and the judge who'd almost had me paying $1,500 a month now knew exactly what had been tried in his courtroom, and judges remember that. The maintenance, the spousal support, that fell apart too. My business was separate property. My house was separate property. The marriage was short, and Brooke was a healthy 33-year-old woman, perfectly capable of working. And Diane made sure the court understood that the money Brooke did think she'd get, the split of what we'd built together, was a lot smaller than she'd counted on. Because it turned out Brooke had spent the last year quietly moving marital money around, hotel rooms, a weekend in Aspen I never took, a $3,000 bracelet that sure wasn't on my wrist, and in Missouri that's called dissipation of marital assets, wasting the marriage's money on the affair, and the court makes you account for every dime of it. By the time they subtracted what she'd already spent on Tyler from what she thought she was owed, Brooke walked out of that marriage with a used Lexus and a security deposit on an apartment in Overland Park. She wanted my house, my money, and a monthly check for 18 years. She left with the car she'd asked me to get the oil changed in. That's the whole thing. That's the whole story, right there in one car. And Tyler. Tyler lost the one thing he'd chased his entire life, which was somebody else's money, because Hannah's family lawyers made that annulment thorough. And the Doyles are not the kind of people you embarrass at their own country club and walk away clean. He lost Hannah. He lost the Mission Hills life he'd married for. He lost $31,000 he did not have, and he lost the only currency he'd ever really traded in, which was everybody thinking he was the good one. Last I heard, he was back in Raytown, sleeping in the basement of a buddy's place, telling anybody who'd listen that his brother ruined his life. I didn't ruin his life. I just stopped paying for it. My mother took the longest. For a while there was nothing. And then one day she showed up at my shop on Front Street, stood in the doorway of my office in the copper smell, and she didn't make excuses, and she didn't defend Tyler. She just said, "I got it wrong." I got it wrong for a long time, not just about this. And I let her sit down, and we didn't fix everything. Some things you don't fix, but it was a start. She comes to my place for dinner now, the second Sunday of the month. Just her. She brings the good rolls. I want to tell you about the quiet. The first night the house was fully mine again, no lawyers pending, papers signed, Brooke's stuff gone from the closet. I stood in the middle of my own living room in Brookside, and I noticed I could hear the maple tree moving outside the window. 6 years I never once heard that tree. I'd been holding my breath so long I forgot I was doing it, and that night I let it out. And I felt about 40 pounds slide off my shoulders and onto the floor and just stay there. I sat on my own porch with a beer, one of those thick summer nights, cicadas going, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, nobody in that house needed anything from me, and nothing in that house was pretending. It was just me and the tree and the quiet, and I have never in my life been so grateful for a quiet house. I got a dog a few months later, a big, dumb yellow lab I named Copper, and he sleeps sideways across the whole bed like he pays the mortgage, and I let him, because it's my bed and my house and my life, and I finally get to decide who's in it. Here's the thing I keep coming back to, and I'll say it and then I'll let you go. People will tell you who they are. They tell you loud, they tell you clear, and usually they tell you a lot earlier than you're ready to hear it. My wife told me the day she pushed me toward that vasectomy for a life she never actually wanted. My brother told me every time he signed one of those notes laughing, like the debt was the joke and I was the punchline. My mother told me every time she looked at me like the furnace guy. I heard all of it. I just didn't want to believe people I loved could mean it. And the smiling at the wedding when Brooke thought she had me. I know some of you wanted me to flip the table, but I'll tell you, the calm was the whole thing. When somebody's counting on your rage to make you stupid, the quietest, most useful thing you can do is smile and let them keep talking. They'll build the whole case against themselves if you just get out of the way and hand them the shovel. So take it from the furnace guy from Raytown. Believe people the first time, and if somebody ever leans in close and tells you they've already beaten you, smile, say thank you, and go get your proof.